Hello, welcome back to the channel. I have a fun video for you today. Normally, I like to either do short form videos or I do a really long form spoiler for new cards that are coming out in the new set. And I am still going to do my long form Edge of Eternities set review, so fret not, that's coming, but I'm going to wait for the whole spoiler to come out. I'm going to do what I always do with that one, which is the morning after the full spoiler drops. I wake up pretty early and grab a coffee and then just kind of do the whole video. But a card got spoiled a couple of days ago for Edge of Eternities that I am so excited about, and I think there's so much to talk about with it that I would be remiss if I didn't make it into its own video. And also, I don't really want it to take up 20-25 minutes of a video that's already going to be like 2 hours long, potentially. So without further ado, I've presented a little slideshow, I've got some deck lists together, and I'd love to talk to you about this is a really corny title, but a weapon to rival Craterhoof Behemoth. So, for context, this combo of Natural Order for Craterhoof Behemoth has been a big part of many metagames, Legacy as well, obviously, but it was a big part of the Highlander metagame for a really long time. The Cradlehoof deck was built entirely around this interaction, around killing people with Craterhoof, and this combo is something that allows a deck to basically generate a bunch of relatively low impact creatures like mana dorks and things like that, and then ultimately turn them into large threats by pumping up their power. And for a long time, this was kind of the only style of this effect that worked. Oh, my slideshow is all kinds of messed up. All right. Sorry, it was taking a little while to load there. But in a Kamigawa Neon Dynasties in the Commander deck, we got our first kind of alternative for this, I think, our real functional alternative. And this is Cyberdrive Awakener. So this is 6 mana, it gives your other artifact creatures flying, and when it enters, every non-artifact you control becomes a 4/4 creature until end of turn. So what people realized, and I want to give credit, there are several people in the community who've been working on decks like this for a long time, since this card came out, basically, is that if you could tinker for Cyberdrive, it did a kind of analogous Craterhoof impression, right? Where if you had some artifacts, you could sack one of them, turn it into a Cyberdrive Awakener, attack with your other artifacts, and win the game that way. There are issues with this plan, though. The biggest one is that where Craterhoof scales exponentially, and it itself is an attacker and a trampler, Cyberdrive just makes flat 4/4s across the board, which means that if you're a deck that isn't doing a whole lot of attacking and blocking, like you need 5 non-artifacts, including a 6th one that you're going to sack to tinker to attack with. And as a result, I don't think this card ever really fully got there. People have played it, and I think it's reasonable, and I do think this plan is an interesting one, and there might still be more juice to squeeze, but this plan has never really fully been able to be a strategy that your deck is built around. But in Edge of Eternities Commander, we are getting a new card that is I think, pretty substantial upgrade to Cyberdrive Awakener that lets you do the same kind of thing. Oh my god, this loading is terrible. Okay, well, on your screen it looks okay. On my screen it's not the best. But this is Depthshaker Titan. So Depthshaker Titan is a 5 red artifact creature robot. And it says when this creature enters, any number of target non-creature artifacts you control become 3/3 artifact creatures. Sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Okay, so it's doing a similar thing to Cyberdrive Awakener. Obviously, the sacking is bad, but we'll get into why I think that's okay. And then the second line of text is each artifact creature you control has melee, trample, and haste. And for the non-commander players among us, melee says whenever a creature with melee attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attack this combat. For us, that's only ever going to be +1/+1. But what this functionally means is that when this enters, you can make all your non-artifacts or your non-creature artifacts into 4/4s or 3/3s that become 4/4s when they attack with trample and haste. And also, importantly, the Depthshaker Titan itself is a 5/5 trample haste melee creature. So this is a big upgrade on Cyberdrive Awakener. If you compare the two, Cyberdrive needs you to have 5 other non-creature artifacts that you can attack with. It needs none of them to die for you to deal 20. And it also leaves behind like a 4/4 flying body, which is okay, but not that threatening if it doesn't get get across the finish line by itself. Depthshaker Titan, comparatively, is making 4/4 trample haste, so not flying, which is a relevant difference, but I think the haste especially is the key word here that is really, really powerful. What this basically means is that you are fine to develop a couple more tokens on the turn that you're casting the Tinker to turn all your things into creatures. With Cyberdrive Awakener, you can't do that. It has to be tokens that have been there, or non-creature artifacts that have been there from the turn before. And I think that's actually a pretty meaningful upgrade. It means that you can't go like play artifact land, play Mox, play a 1-mana artifact, tinker away something, and turn those things into attacking creatures. The other thing here is that because the Depthshaker itself gets to attack as a 6/6 trample haste, you actually don't need very many non-creature artifacts to kill your opponent. In this case, if you have 3, that's 18 damage, assuming everything gets through. If you have 4, that's 22 damage, again, assuming everything gets through. But you can see it's already factors better than the Cyberdrive Awakener. I think there is obviously some tension because this is more expensive. Cyberdrive Awakener being 6 and only having 1 pip in its cost is means it's easier to cast, for sure. And this being double red means that it doesn't slot quite as naturally into some decks potentially. But I think the upside on how much this just ends the game when it comes into play makes it worth it. The other part, too, is the sacrifice them at the beginning of the end step. That does mean that if this doesn't kill your opponent, you maybe are losing quite a lot of material, and I do think that's a problem. But I don't think you're necessarily casting this in spots where you are expecting that to happen. I think one other pretty significant drawback is that the Trample Haste is a static ability on the Depthshaker Titan. Unlike Craterhoof Behemoth, which just statically gives the power or toughness to everything, even if it gets removed, they still get the power and toughness and the trample. Depthshaker doesn't. And so that's definitely a concern. But that was a concern with Cyberdrive Awakener as well. So, with all that being said, what kind of decks can we look at to leverage this Depthshaker Titan? I've got a large number of deck lists to show you. Some of them are mine, some of them are other people's, and I hope that you're gonna like them. So, yeah, let's start. And we'll go back to my recording here. This looks okay. Is this the right? Hold on. Let's make this a little bigger. There we go. We can even do this. No, let's do this. Sorry, you're getting live editing by me. Okay, so anyway, let's start with this deck by me, but also this is inspired by some stuff that I've seen on the Discord. In particular, Discord user Vast posted a deck that was similar to this a number of months ago that I liked the look of, and I've been kind of working on it myself for several months since then as well. So the basic idea here is that you are playing a sort of blue-red tempo shell. We've got like some cards you would expect to see in blue-red tempo, like Ragavan and Tameo. You've got some burn spells over here. You've got Corey Steelcutter, real hot one for sure. But then you're also looking to leverage artifact synergies. So you've got some really deep ones like Akal Pakal, which lets you basically sleight a hand every time an artifact comes into play. You've got like Ivora, Insatiable Air, which is going to do a nice job of making you some little dorky artifacts. This one makes you blood tokens. Generous Plunderer makes you treasures. Professional Facebreaker is one that I've added. This one makes you treasure tokens when you're dealing damage. So there's a bunch of random things. You've got Veronica, Dissident Scribe, which makes junk tokens. You've got really a wide variety of random token makers. And then additionally, this deck is just playing 16 regular artifacts. For me, like I've got this Vexing Bauble Grafdigger's Cage in here, which is something that I've started to put into more and more decks that are playing artifacts and have ways to get rid of artifacts in particular. Like in this case, I've got Shrapnel Blast, Improvised Club as ways that you can sack them. I just think that having these kind of like very powerful hoses against some of the combo decks, it just feels worth it to me increasingly. Like both these cards basically read Citadel Storm can't win the game. Grafdigger's Cage turns off Flash Hulk. And I've just decided that adding these is is worth it a lot of the time as a way to have an escape valve. Yeah, it's not ideal in other matchups, but anyway, that's maybe a dialogue for a different video. So this deck gets to play Tinker, and this deck was already a Cyberdrive Awakener deck, as you can see. Now, I've left Cyberdrive in the deck, and part of the reason that I've done that is I think there are going to be spots where maybe getting this Depthshaker Titan is too high risk, and you won't want to do it. Like I mentioned, where you feel like removal spell is pretty likely. Maybe you don't get this one, maybe you get this one instead. The other thing about this deck is that it is good at pushing damage already. So this deck is going to not need to kill your opponent from 20. Most of the time, you're going to be looking to push, I think, 10, 12 damage across the board. And Depthshaker is even better, I think, in those spots because it requires less of the tokens to connect, or even if they have a board presence around, you can still punch through it. So yeah, this, I think, is where I'm going to start. When this card comes out, I don't make any like 100% promises, but I would really like to play this deck. I'll either try and play it on a live stream with one of the guys, or maybe we'll do a first drafts and I'll play this deck against a couple of decks in the meta. But this for me is, I think, the most exciting place to go with this new Depthshaker Titan in a deck that's kind of newer or less explored. I also think there are some existing archetypes that can leverage Depthshaker Titan pretty effectively. I haven't included it in this video because I don't want it to be 45 minutes instead of I'm targeting like around half an hour. But I think even Citadel Storm could think about playing the card. I don't think it's good enough in that deck, and it is a 7-drop in your deck that's trying not to flip expensive ones off the top of its deck. But that is the like find Tinker deck, and I think you could potentially find lines where that's worth doing. It's probably not right, to be honest, and I haven't included it for a reason. But one deck that I think kind of naturally does slot it in pretty excitingly is Paradox Academy. So what I've done, this is a very stock Paradox Academy list. This is what I play when we are doing testing and we want to have an Academy deck in the testing pool. So there's nothing super crazy going on here. I believe I got this list from either the Winners Archive or I got it from the Canadian Highlander database, which just has a lot of kind of quote-unquote stock lists. But yeah, there's nothing super out to lunch going on here. But if you notice, and I mean, this is really obvious, like this deck just makes a ton of artifacts, and you are sometimes in spots where your board makes a lot of mana and can tutor for Tinker, but it can't necessarily convert that Tinker into an immediate win. And in previous iterations and in previous times, you would have to go Tinker for Academy, or for Paradox Engine, and hope to then draw into the way to win the game, or draw engine of some sort. Or maybe you would go get the One Ring, and you would use that as a way to eventually try and win the game. Or alternatively, even you might go get Chromatic Orrery, which is the other big one. This is, again, if you have a lot of cards or you have a lot of mana, this is a way that you can potentially start to find the cards to win the game. But what I did is, when this card got spoiled and I wanted to test it here, I just added it to this deck, no changes. I removed Balance because Balance got pointed. Yeah, so I removed Balance, added Depthshaker Titan, and I have found that there are definitely spots where you are pretty happy to go get this with a Tinker because it just represents lethal. And it even represents lethal through them killing the Depthshaker Titan, which is something I think you could relatively reasonably expect them to do because they're not going to have a lot of targets for their removal against this deck. But there are just tons of times when you have 8 artifacts in play. It's not uncommon, especially if you get something like a Forensic Gadgeteer going, or if you've had a Hull Breacher go off. It's not hard at all to end up in a situation where the Depthshaker Titan is going to put them dead on board. So I think this is a pretty interesting spot. I'm going to try it as kind of a flex Tinker target. I might remove another expensive Tinker target. I don't know what I would, to be honest. The Portal to Phyrexia is the one that stands out to me. This card sometimes to me feels off-plan for what this deck is trying to do. It's like a fair card in my extremely combo-dense deck, but at the same time, I recognize that this does win games in mid-range matchups, but to me, this one has always stood out a little bit as maybe being a little bit underwhelming. But yeah, so this is the other kind of, this is the established deck that I think is best poised to slot this card in. And it's worth noting, I think the reason why you wouldn't have played Cyberdrive Awakener in this deck in the past is that the Cyberdrive Awakener is a little bit too slow. This deck is very good at making a bunch of tokens on the turn that it goes off and casts Tinker, and so getting the haste from the Depthshaker Titan, I think, matters more. Although, to be honest, and maybe this is worth doing even before this card comes out, maybe I should try some games with Cyberdrive in my deck, and, you know, see if there's times where I want to fetch it, or whether it would be better or worse than Depthshaker Titan. But yeah, so this is thing number one. I think it's pretty sweet, and I would definitely be willing to try this as kind of an established archetype that's playing Tinker already, that could leverage this card. Next, we have two other decks. These are pretty close to my heart in terms of some of my favorite decks. I love playing Affinity in Highlander. It's definitely the deck that I would love if we could get it to the point where it's something that's tier 1, and I do think they just keep printing more and more Affinity cards. There are a couple more in Edge of Eternities. To be honest, I haven't fully updated this list yet with everything that's coming out, but I think that the commander deck that Depthshaker Titan is in actually is going to give a couple more cards for these decks that we're going to get to slot in, which is pretty exciting. But this is my Grixis Affinity list. This is the one that I decided to start with, and I just cut a Mox and added Tinker and added Depthshaker Titan as a starting point. I think that you may also want to look at cutting Urza's Saga for Mystical Tutor in this list. The problem is the Mystical is pretty underwhelming outside of finding exactly Tinker. So I think you maybe just want to have this Tinker to exist as an escape valve, but you don't want to be quite so all in. The other thing, and this is not nothing, but these Affinity decks, they draw so many cards that they oftentimes, like, casting a 7-drop is actually not impossible in these Affinity decks, just because of how much mana they can sometimes make in the late game. In particular, you also, like, get to use Mishra's Workshop some amount of the time, which is, like, pretty exciting. So this deck is really also looking to leverage the fact that this Depthshaker Titan doesn't need to really animate a ton of creatures to win the game. In this deck, too, you could potentially tinker for this, animate nothing, and win the game. This is a deck that's going to create a lot of large constructs, and so giving those large constructs trample and haste on their own is already going to be pretty scary. And then additionally, you have these draws where you can, like, go wide with Third Path Iconoclasts, so maybe you've like created a bunch of smaller artifacts, and again, the trample haste and the +1/+1 is going to matter, and you don't necessarily need to use the animation nearly as much. You can just use this as an anthem effect to push damage across the board in the end. The other thing about this Grixis deck is that I think the Tinker feels a bit more naturally slotted in, and I may even put one more different Tinker target in the deck, but in Grixis you get to Tinker for Chaos Defiler, which is pretty hot. Having your Tinker also be able to remove a problematic permanent, to me, seems pretty attractive. Also getting Iron Man, I think, is pretty good. I have yet to get to play with this card because it's not on Magic Online, so, you know, take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I think this card, in my goldfishing and in my playtesting, in my playtesting, I've been kind of trying to spot for where I think this card would be good, and I do think it's pretty powerful, but this is another one you could tinker for if you were so inclined. And lastly, like, Kappa Cannoneers is never bad to tinker for as well. Just putting one of these in play in a kind of grindier matchup is also going to be something that is totally reasonable to do. Yeah, not a whole lot else to add. One other thing I guess I will briefly mention is that these equipment are also kind of nice as things that sit in play and can eventually be turned into 3/3s if they are required to be, but obviously they don't need to be equipment. They don't need to be 3/3s to be super effective. Okay, next one. This is Jeskai Affinity. Very similar idea. The Tinker here is a bit less powerful because you don't have the Chaos Defiler, like I mentioned. So your Tinker targets are basically Depthshaker Titan, Kappa Cannoneer, and I believe in this deck you could get Thousand Moon Smithy, the One Ring, pretty happily, and the newly printed Machinist's Arsenal from Final Fantasy. This card is juiced, and in this deck, I think it's routinely going to come down as like a 15-15, something like that. Well, not 15-15, but it's not super hard, I think, to imagine it being like a 10-10. So, pretty exciting here. As a Tinker target as well. I did the same thing here. I just removed a Mox and added Tinker. I think you could potentially try to be more nuanced as well in this deck. I haven't decided to be especially make especially large changes with the fact that I'm playing Tinker in mind, but I think you might have to, and maybe you could. It's interesting to note when I started playing this kind of like BattleBots Affinity shell, it was in 2015, and at the time, the attraction to playing the deck for me was that it was a kind of Tinker aggro deck. You had this plan B. And at the time, I believe I was playing Esper, and Surge was also playing a similar deck. He and I were both kind of trying to work on it at the same time. And but you would be tinkering for Blightsteel Colossus. Like, that was the big hit. And times have changed. Blightsteel, obviously not a card that you're allowed to just put in your deck anymore. But Depthshaker Titan, an exciting one for sure. And again, this is another deck where you're making a lot of tokens, you're going wide, and so just using the static text on Depthshaker Titan is also potentially super, super effective. So these are the 4 lists that I've put together and added, either put together entirely based around Depthshaker Titan, or I've added it to an existing list. But I would be remiss if I did not give credit to a variety of deck builders in the Canadian Highlander community who have been working on shells that are similar to this for a long time. So I will work my way through a couple of deck lists, and in particular there's a fan favorite deck list here, which is Canadian Highlander Food, which I think for a lot of people is a bit of a white whale, something that they would really love for it to be playable and effective. And I don't know that Depthshaker Titan makes Food a playable deck, but it's another thing to do with your food, and that's not nothing for sure. So this is something that's interesting and I think worth at least thinking about. But yeah, all of these deck lists come from players in the Canadian Highlander Discord. If you are interested in Canadian Highlander and you are not in the Discord, I do recommend you join it. It's pretty easy to find. It has like 10,000 members at this point, so it should pop up pretty easily. But let's start with this Canadian Highlander Cyberdrive Drinker. This deck obviously hasn't been updated super recently, but there's a lot of good ideas here, and this one is one of the few ones that I found that is already playing red, which I think is kind of attractive. So this deck is looking to do like some Goblin Welder shenanigans as well, and I think Cyberdrive Awakener is in this deck to go with Tinker. And so you can see how if you added Depthshaker Titan to this existing shell, there's a lot of nice stuff that you can do, and it does provide you, I think, with another pretty interesting Goblin Welder target, which is something that's cool as well. This deck is doing similar things to what I'm doing in the Affinity list and in the Artifact Tempo list, which is that you're kind of just looking to generate stuff. I love, 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 love Chrome Host Seed Shark. This is a card that I want to try and play more, just kind of across the board, but especially in this kind of shell, the Chrome Host Seed Shark is a sweet one, because if you can get Chrome Host Seed Shark going, make a couple of incubation tokens, and then animate them with Depthshaker Titan, they keep their +1/+1 counters. So there's a couple of extra synergies here. If you like cast, you get to cast Tinker, make a 3/3 token, then turn it into a base 3/3, so it's a 7 power trample haste with the Depthshaker Titan. So yeah, I hope you can start to see why I'm so excited about this card. Other things that are going on in this deck that are novel and cool. Kellogg is a sweet one. This is a first strike haste creature that when it attacks, it makes treasures, and then you can sack treasures to gain control of things. I don't think we're doing that especially often, but this is another thing that is just generating you more material. This is a list that I might look to add something like Professional Facebreaker to, just another way to start generating some treasures. Similarly, the other kind of overrun for artifacts is this Rise and Shine card. This one says target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 +1/+1 counters on it, yeah, you can also overload it for 6 mana. So this one is pretty interesting, and it actually combos with both Cyberdrive and with Depthshaker Titan. You can do both, which is nice. Similarly to how Chrome Host Seed Shark works, obviously it becomes a 0/0 with counters. So if you change its base power to be 3/3, it's getting even larger. One thing about this list that I would be looking to adjust, I think, is I would want to try and find a few more ways to be making artifacts. I think we are maybe a little bit low in our ability to generate material. We obviously have all of these artifacts as well, and I love stuff like Grim Bauble, which is going to do something and then leave behind material. That's definitely something that we're looking to do. Blood Fountain is a all-star. The Aetherflux Reservoir might be slightly out to lunch, although what we could look to do is, because this is a Tinker deck, like, and we're already playing Aetherflux, like, maybe it's not insane to add Bolas' Citadel and kind of play this fair Citadel plan in the spots where we think that that's something we might be interested in doing. For the points in this list, they are on Academy, Saga, Ancient Tomb, Mystical Tutor, Tinker, Soul Ring. I think that's a totally reasonable spread to be on. I like the idea of adding Mystical in decks that are looking to use Tinker as a way to overrun with Cyberdrive Awakener. And one of the things I really like about the way that this deck is built, actually, is that it's mostly just playing the good cards, and then it's slotting in some synergy cards to help make the plan work. So, like, you'll notice if we look at this suite of instants, basically everything here is just a card you would put in your deck normally, with a couple of exceptions. Deduce and Deadly Dispute care about specifically having a lot of artifacts, and Deduce is nice because it leaves an artifact behind. But other than that, we're just playing the good ones, and I like that. I like not making a bunch of considerations that take your deck off plan. I think it's good to just be playing the good cards. Seems like a very reasonable place to be. Cards like Quag Feast and Profane Tutor are question marks for me. I might look to remove those, but I'm not certain. And in this deck, I think you might just remove Cyberdrive and add Depthshaker Titan, and you wouldn't play both. But I'm not 100% certain of that either. But yeah, sweet list, very cool. And this is one of the places that I would start if I was looking to build more of a dedicated Cyberdrive Awakener like material deck, and I think this is sweet. Next we have this list from a username that's relatively unreadable. It's Sans Green Game Objects / Cyberhoof. Let me quickly work out who this deck is by, because I do want to be giving credit where credit is due. It does not seem fair for me to not be doing so. So this is from Discord user Oath of Timmy. So this one is no green, which is great. Again, we're already playing red cards, which I think is important in the context here where you want to be able to hard cast the Depthshaker Titan. We've got similar artifact themes. Obviously, we're playing all the cheap ones. We've got some enchantments in the form, some equipment, in the form of like Nettle Cyst, Pre-War Formalware. Very interesting. But this one is a bit more in on being an aggressive deck. So we've got some lower drop creatures. Astrid Peth is a sweet one. Whenever it attacks or enters, create a food token, and then when you sacrifice her food or clue, it explores. This is a pretty exciting one, really powerful at making material. Again, Chromos Seed Shark, A+, big fan. Gleaming Gear Drake is another sweet one. This one makes an artifact on ETB, which I think is something that is relatively desirable. Similarly, we've got both of the Thraben Inspectors, Novice and Thraben Inspector, and to a lesser extent, Valdarin Epicure, who is, rather than learning, trying to drink, I guess. So yeah, this deck is, again, it's aggressive enough on its own that you're not going to need the Tinker for Depthshaker Titan to be this super go wide game winning plan, but it is going to win the game, and I do think in this deck it'll win the game more often than Cyberdrive Awakener would. Again, for the same reasons. I think the trample and the haste are pretty important, and that you are much happier casting it and not winning the game right away, because there's so many other ways to make large artifact creatures in this deck. Yeah, so this is another sweet one. The points in this deck: Tinker, Tolarian Academy, or Saga, Ancient Doom, Mystical Deduce. So same points here as the other one. This is just 4 color. Things that I would be looking at with this list, I wonder if we need to be white, or if just being Grixis is better. I think there are some mana consistency issues that you run into, but in general, I like a lot of what's going on here, and adding the white does add some pretty impressive 1-drops and 2-drops, so I do understand wanting it. It also adds some of the most premium removal in the game, and Path to Exile, which is also pretty exciting. So yeah, another sweet list. This is very cool. And then the last one I'm going to look at is, this is not a red deck. So this is still a Tinker for Cyberdrive deck. This is the second last one before I get into the fan favorite foods deck. So this is not a red deck, which does mean that adding Depthshaker over something like Cyberdrive Awakener, or Cyberdrive Titan, or Cyberdrive Awakener, Jesus, I've been saying these card names too much. Yeah, so adding Depthshaker Titan over Cyberdrive Awakener in this deck is less free because it is not hard castable. However, I think that this is a list that is doing an especially good job of making a lot of material, a lot of food, and yeah, I think that it's at least worth exploring. One thing that I didn't do, and I definitely will do, is look at making a rug version of both of my artifact deck, because cards like Oko and a lot of these random food makers like Gilded Goose, Sentinel of the Nameless City is a really nice one. Tough Cookie is a really nice one. There are just a lot of pretty reasonable food makers in green that you can add. Oh, I love this card, Lonus Genetics Expert. 1 blue-green for a 1/2 that evolves, and whenever it evolves, you investigate. Or whenever you put counters on it, you investigate that many times, actually. So I guess theoretically you could live the dream. And then obviously there's another Lonus here, Lonus Cryptozoologist, who says whenever another non-creature token enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. Also quite good. So yeah, this is a deck that it's not a food deck so much as it's a game action or game objects deck. But this is another one where, I don't know, I mean, it makes a lot of mana, and because it generates a lot of mana, it might actually well want a Tinker payoff that can leverage summoning sick tokens, which is not something that Cyberdrive Awakener can do. Lastly, so yeah, this is by Vast, the person who I took inspiration from on the blue-red artifact tempo list. And then lastly, we have Kelvin's Food Turns. So this is doing similar things. This deck is Bug. It has some crossover with the last deck we just looked at, except obviously it's playing black instead of white. Some nice ones you get in exchange for being black are Vine Wrap Mentor. You also get access to this Hazel's Brewmaster combo where you have Devoted Druid and Walking Ballista, and you can use Brewmaster to win the game infinitely there. Is this deck on Survival of the Fittest? It's not. That's probably something I would be looking to add. I feel like if you have these cards in your deck, Survival becomes a one-card win a lot of the time, so I would probably be looking to add that one. But then you also get access to like cards like Greta, which is a card that really cares specifically about food and also makes food herself. Yeah, I think that largely this deck is kind of comparable to the Vant deck. The one other thing I will note is that this deck is looking to play a variety of take extra turn cards. We have Time Warp, Temporal Mastery, Temporal Manipulation, and Capture of Jinzu, which is pretty exciting. And then also you have Time Sieve, and I will get into Time Sieve with the food deck. So one of the things that these decks have historically tried to do is leverage Time Sieve and ways to generate food tokens to sort of try and go infinite potentially, or take extra turns out of nowhere. This deck I don't think is especially well set up to literally go infinite. It's pretty hard to generate enough foods. And so one of the things that you can do with Depthshaker Titan instead of Time Sieve is, rather than converting your 5 artifacts into an extra turn, you could potentially just convert it into a game win, right? I think it's probably a situation where you would play both and not cut one for the other. But it's definitely worth mentioning. Lastly, with this deck, there are just a bunch of artifacts, 26 artifacts, most of which are ones you're planning to keep in play. You're not planning to sacrifice them. So you're definitely going to have a good amount of material sitting around in that regard as well. And you'll note we already have kind of a plan here that just works a lot slower with the Antiquities War, which is going to fuel us up and then ultimately turn our creatures into 5/5s. And Depthshaker Titan is doing that, but in a less predictable way. So, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the one of the more premier artifact token creating decks in the format, and this is something that I think is a fan favorite deck. A lot of people really like the food deck. So this is Food Combo. This is a list that lost in the finals at YJ a couple of months ago at this point. By YJ player Jake. You will know him as he was in the finals 2 years ago, the year that Thomas won the YJ top 8. His opponent in the finals was Jacob. So this deck is really a a work of art, and I don't think there's enough time to go through every single card. But this one there's some really sweet ones in particular, like Ardrix and Nev, twin casters, is a 2/2 that's doubling up all tokens you make, which when you look at this card, you think, well, that's probably a commander card, and it probably is a lot of the time, and except in exactly this deck. You've got a variety of Lord of the Rings cards. Obviously, the hobbits love making foods, and it's no different here. This deck, and the reason why I'm including this deck last, is this deck is not playing Tinker currently. It's not part of the game plan. It is playing Triple Mox Tolarian Academy currently, and the plan here usually ends up involving winning with Time Civ, or just building some astonishing board presence with like a near infinite amount of treasures and foods and clues. And one of the things that I think including Tinker for either Cyberdrive Awakener or Depthshaker Titan would do is allow this deck to win faster. And I know that that is an issue that Jacob has had in the past, is withdrawing with this deck, because it just generates this sort of insurmountable advantage, but then doesn't always have a way to push through damage and win the game quickly. And Depthshaker Titan definitely would be that. So yeah, definitely a sweet list. I in particular love this Tireless Provisioner card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token, so it gets to do either. And this is something that I would be looking at in the rug version of the Artifact Tempo deck I was talking about. I think that if you get to play this and then like play a fetch or something like that, you're already just like so off to the races. It's very good. And this is one where you would really like for your artifact creatures to have haste, right? So something like this, if you're tinkering for Cyberdrive Awakener on a turn where you played a fetch land, neither of those tokens that you created can do anything, and that's in stark contrast to the Depthshaker Titan. And it is why I think the card is meaningfully better enough that I'm excited to be talking about it, and why I've spent 37 minutes at this point talking about one spoiler card. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about this Food Turns deck. This is also from the Discord, from Discord user Sadalen. This is doing a lot of similar things to what Jacob's deck is doing, with some tweaks, but I just wanted to show a slightly different take on the deck as well. So this is another one where, again, we're playing Triple Mox plus Tolarian Academy, so we would need to remove one of these Moxes in exchange for Tinker, and then I think maybe there's a dialogue of do we go even one lower on Moxen in order to fit some other tutors in the deck, and I'm not 100% sure, to be completely honest, but I think that you definitely could. So this is doing a lot of the same stuff. We've got the hobbits, hobbits and halflings, I guess. Yeah, they're halflings for copyright reasons maybe, but we've got the halflings, and then we've got a bunch of the other cards that care about food, and then we're just basically, again, generating game objects and typically creating a relatively unassailable position. And from my perspective, boy, would it be nice if we could turn those game objects into a way to win the game faster. And again, this is something where this deck is generating a lot of game objects and then not necessarily being able to win with them the turn they come into play. And I just think that would be, that this is something where Depthshaker Titan would ultimately fix this problem. If you look, right, like even with these cards like Lannis, like these are things that would be making more artifacts when the Depthshaker enters. So there's lots of ways that you could get to a lethal Depthshaker attack from kind of nowhere. Like you could start from a very small board and ultimately end up with a board that's going to be finishing people off. Obviously, in this context, you don't have red in the deck, and so maybe the approach has to be, let's find like a rug food deck to build, or maybe a 4-color no black food deck to build that's going to be playing Depthshaker, and maybe some ways to play some treasure tokens as well. That's something that I would be looking at, and it's probably where I'll go next. Like I said, my favorite place to start is going to be this blue-red kind of artifact tempo deck. That's what I'm going to be playing right away with Depthshaker Titan. I am so excited about this card. It might be bad, and one of the things that I think is interesting about Canadian Highlander is that you can get really excited about a card, play it twice, and then discover your card evaluation for this was just way off and it's unplayable. I think the major tension is going to be, is the fact that removing the Depthshaker neuters a lot of the attack. Is that going to matter? Are we going to find ourselves in situations where we need every shred of damage from the Depthshaker to win the game, or are we going to find that it's often just killing through a lot of interaction? And my read is, if your deck is built properly, that this will often just be a potent finisher in a way that Cyberdrive Awakener never was. So yeah, that's it. That's all I got. I know I said I would try and keep it shorter. This video is 40 minutes. It's me. I do have a tendency to talk at length about things, but that's why I wanted to do this as a standalone video, so that we didn't end up with a an interlude in the set review of just 25 minutes of Liam talking about Depthshaker Titan. So yeah, if you like this video and you want to see more like it, please let me know in the comments. I love talking about deck building. It's definitely my favorite part of Canadian Highlander. Jared and Trent are by far the better players out of the three of us. Just by far. If you look at us on the triangle of Timmy, Spike, Johnny, like Trent is our Spike, Jared is probably our Johnny, and then I'm probably our Timmy. If we're picking one role for everyone, everyone exists on a spectrum. In that way, but if we're putting us, I'm definitely the one who exists in the spectrum of I want to build card decks. I'm really excited about new cards, and so I'm always excited to talk about ways that you might break new things. So yeah, thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and we'll be back with more Edge of Eternities spoilers and content as the week goes on. Thanks.